We intervene out of love, brother.
CNN's Don Lemon had on one of my favorite people in the world, philosopher, intellectual, and activist Cornel West, to discuss the George Floyd trial, and brought Don Lemon to tears. Now, this is a very powerful moment, and I'll discuss more after the clip. Check it out.
Now, let me just add this one thing, though, brother.
Yes, sir. Go ahead.
I thought about Brother George, and I thought about my brother, and I thought about my father, and I thought about my grandfather. I'm not going to stand there for no 9 minutes and 29 seconds and watch somebody murder my father. No, no, no. Martin Luther King Jr. talked about pacifism, and I believe in nonviolence, but I'm not going to watch that kind of murder. I love my brother Charles McMillan. That's why he was crying. That's what his tears were about. He felt helpless. We not going to do that. Some of us black folk, some of us black men, we're not going to stand there. We're going to have to intervene in some way. They ain't going to kill us like that, and we remain spectators. Because somewhere I read, silence is not an option. I don't stand with the silence. That's the last two sentences of your letter to Drew, your letter to your nephew. But America needs to understand that too. We got a self-respect. We got a self-defense. And we intervene when you start killing us like that.
I'm sorry.
We intervene out of love, brother. Out of deep love.
All right, so I'm going to further explain a couple of the things that references that Cornel West brings up there. But first, just to address, I've watched this clip several times now, and honestly, it gets more and more powerful the more I watch it. Cornel West discussing how he couldn't just sit there and watch this happen. Now, understand this is not, an indictment of the witnesses there. He's just pointing out how, how much more can we take? Because the witnesses there understood, and Cornel West understands this, that if anybody intervened and, tried to, say, push the officer off of George Floyd's neck, that wouldn't have gone well. That person likely would have been killed, and George Floyd still would have been killed, and the officer would have said, hey, this person came at me when I was trying to restrain a suspect. And he likely would get off for both murders because of that. So there really was nothing, people there could have done. And let me bring up some of what's gone on so far during this trial. So from New York Mag here, jurors have now heard testimony from 11 people who witnessed George Floyd's death, and as the Washington Post observes, a common theme has emerged. Many have said they feel guilty for letting Floyd down. So Cornel West brought up Charles McMillan. So he was one of the witnesses, a 61-year-old, said he saw officers take Floyd out of his car, handcuff him, and walk him toward the patrol car. Quote, I was telling Floyd, comply with them, just get in the car, you can't win. McMillan said he was trying to make the situation easier on Floyd, quote, because I have had interactions with the cops myself, and I understand once you get in the cuffs, you can't win. Now, this is, so in addition to Charles McMillan here, there's also been a cashier who told his manager about a fake $20 bill that Floyd gave him, and ultimately one of his coworkers called the cops, and that's what led to this whole incident. And the cashier discussed how he feels really guilty for doing that and not being able to help Floyd during this incident. Also, a trained MMA fighter was another witness discussing how he was telling Derek Chauvin, the officer during the incident, that he was choking off blood to George Floyd's head, and the officer, of course, didn't care at all. And again, one of the witnesses there just discussing how he felt helpless, not being able to intervene. I can't even imagine being in that situation and knowing this guy is killing this man, and knowing that if you do anything, you will also likely be killed trying to save him. Just a completely helpless situation. Now, I also want to bring up what appeared to bring or help bring Don Lemon to tears here. So Cornel West actually brings up a piece of Don Lemon's writing from a recent book. So in his commentary, Dr. West referenced Lemon's letter to his nephew, Trishad Bush, published in his book, This is the Fire. That letter concluded, "You're old enough to know what's going on, approaching the precipice where you'll begin to understand. Soon you'll see the difference between those who preach, those who march, and those who maintain a deferential silence while the bullhorn of racism blares the same foul tropes it's been sounding for 400 years. I promise you, True, because I love you, I will not stand among the silent. Silence is no longer an option. Last thing here before I get to the second clip. Cornel West has a way of moving CNN anchors to tears. So I think this is just last year, 2020. Anderson Cooper moved to tears during an interview with Cornel West about racial justice. And that was also around discussing George Floyd. Cornel West is just an incredible communicator. I mean, this is why he's one of my favorite people. He's someone I look up to when trying to communicate to people and, trying to change minds and educate. He is just an incredible leader on that front and always has been. Now, I want to play the second clip here because, a lot of people are curious maybe what happened after this clip. So there was another question that was brought up, and I think this is also worth sharing as well.
Let me ask you this, because everyone I saw on that video, and I asked this earlier, everyone I saw had some empathy, saw the humanity, felt the humanity in George Floyd, as you said, foibles and all. We're not thinking that when someone's laying on the pavement in that situation, like what they've done wrong. We're thinking about when you're taking the life from a human being. Why is it that every single, when you said the police thing, everybody saw his humanity and felt it, except for the police officers who were there?
Because they've been getting away with it for decade after decade after decade. Even the good policemen, in the language of the mainstream, they remain silent. And they allow the gangsters in their ranks who've been mistreating folk. And keep in mind, brother, it's not just black folk who've been treated like this. You got some white brothers and sisters being treated like this, but we get 3 times. We get 36% of all of them. We only 12.8% of the population. You see what I mean? So we concerned about everybody. We ain't just we're not confined to just the chocolate side. But I'll be damned if we're not gonna start with the chocolate side of town, with our blacks, our brown, and indigenous folk, and our Asians. And it is in the name of love, but love sometimes can get real tough. Love is protect, respect, and correct. And we're not going to stand there and just be victims. No.
So the total lack of empathy there that was brought up by Don Lemon, lack of empathy shown by the police, you see it over and over and over again. And I've covered countless stories about the police in very similar circumstances doing the exact same thing. There's just a total lack of humanity in the police force. And when you even have so-called good cops, those individuals are often weeded out. I've covered other stories where officers have tried to speak up about injustice that they have been witness to. And instead of those officers who caused the injustice or committed the injustice, instead of them being removed from the force, the so-called, what they call a rat, the person discussing and bringing up those injustices, those so-called rats are the ones taken out. So they label the good cops rats. And what do you expect from a police culture that allows this to continue, where this is the norm? Anybody calling it out is weeded out. So you end up having the saturation of just the worst, absolute worst people in these positions of power. Shouldn't it all be surprising when you see videos like what happened to George Floyd or the countless others that have happened? It's stunning, the complete lack of humanity that continues in such a position of power. And the only way around this, really, as I've discussed before, is to move responsibilities away from the police, because it's about the culture. You can't really change police culture overnight. It's not going to happen. The only thing you can do is limit their power. So many of these calls that often go to police, like mental health calls, should go to other services, public services, mental health professionals, people that are specific to those various areas. The only way to really deal with police power is to limit their power.